Hello and welcome to MWGF, The Review. I'm Tamina Kausji and I'll be taking us through this 1 hour special. The Malaysia Women and Girls Forum, or MWGF for short, is an annual event that has taken place every year since 2020 with a simple objective: to bring Malaysians together to take stock of our nation's progress when it comes to ensuring and accelerating the rights, well-being and potential of our women and girls. MWGF is an initiative by the United Nations and the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA Malaysia. Since the year 2020, the Malaysia Women and Girls Forum has been a meeting point, a bridge that connects the public, civil society and policy stakeholders to discuss essential social, economic and political solutions required for the advancement of Malaysia's women and girls. Now, here's a quick overview of MWGF and highlights from the last 3 forums.
The Women and Girls Forum is a dedicated platform through which the UN works with a broad range of stakeholders to enhance knowledge and understanding of the issues, to identify key areas for action and coalition building,
to discern and activate solutions for the advancement of women and girls in Malaysia.
Maintaining this forum as an annual meeting point of key players is one among many initiatives to ensure that these strong voices, success stories, and accumulation of recommendations across the themes can inspire policies, decisions, and action.
Boosting the welfare and opportunities of Malaysia's women and girls as the country progresses towards the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals.
Malaysia's women and girls are the hearts and soul of our beloved nation. Ensuring the well-being and economic equity of half of our population is essential not only for Malaysia's development, but also to ensure full pandemic economic recovery.
When a country fails its women, that country fails. We cannot progress nor make advancements as a nation if we do not have the full participation and properly invest in our female population. That is a simple fact.
By recognizing the significant role of women, Malaysia can definitely achieve gender equality through promoting the full rights of women and girls.
Malaysia's gender gap is still large compared with ASEAN and aspirational countries in OECD economies.
Only 55.5% of Malaysian women are in the labour force. If you compare that to men, 80.9% is in the labour force.
With the changing of the mindset and the transforming of behaviour is what we need in order to bring real and effective transformation and gender equality to our society.
The equality is going to benefit the family, it's going to benefit the society, it's going to benefit the country.
Requires us men to actively participate and change our ways too. Men in power need to objectively look at women's potential and contribution.
We are happy to see that if we are able to narrowing down the gender gap in the parental leaves between the husband and the wife.
The goal here is to unlock the freedom to choose to work, and I think that's what really needs to be emphasized.
We need to break the gender stereotypes and transform gender stories to make it more inclusive, because media is a very important medium.
Invest, please, in affordable childcare in the community.
Child marriage is a violation of bodily autonomy.
We need better comprehensive sexuality education.
Access to justice is critical. Every one of you have given excellent examples of how we can shatter these stereotypes, we can break the glass ceilings and we can make a difference.
Do check out our website mwgf.org to find out more, and also connect with us via UNFPA Malaysia's social media platforms. Each MWGF derives key resolutions that are essential for achieving our goal of empowering and ensuring the well-being of Malaysia's women and girls. We, the MWGF Secretariat, have compiled all the resolutions to date and broken them down into 3 core discussion areas, which are: first, the economic empowerment of women; second, legislating gender equality; and third, a focus on gender norms, awareness, and comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE. Right, with that said and done, let's get things started. Hello and welcome to the boardroom. Now, in this first segment on women's economic empowerment, we'll review policy changes that have taken place over the last 3 years and the ones that are still needed to harness women's full economic potential in Malaysia. To kickstart our very first segment on the economic empowerment of women, I'd like to welcome our panelists, Tunku Ira Tunku Razif, Assistant Representative with UNFPA Malaysia, and of course Lee Min Hui, Analyst with the Institute of Strategic and International Studies. Now ladies, of course before we begin the discussion, we actually had the opportunity to speak with Yang Berhormat Dato Sri Nancy Shukri, Minister of Women, Family and Community Development, on this very issue. Let's take a look at her comments. YB Nancy, thank you so much for making time to join us.
Thank you for coming here.
Yang Berhormat, if I could start off by looking at the discussion through the eyes of economic empowerment of women. Okay. Now, something which we have been speaking about very deeply, especially this year, ever since you have been our Minister of Women, Family, Community Development, is increasing women's labour force participation rate. Tell us a little bit more about your ministry's work on this agenda, YB.
Well, if you remember, it was launched by the Prime Minister on the economy Madani on the, well, it's sometimes in July, 27th of July this year, 2023. Now, that's where he had mentioned about aiming to increase the female labor force to 60% compared to what it was before. No, but it has to be within 10 years. And then the female labor force, as we have noticed in the country, well, actually it is already reaching about 55.3%. That was in 2020, and later in 2022, it has increased slightly to 55.8%. But having said that, the reason why this happened is because mainly as women, our focus is mainly on the family. We always focus on the family. That's why women tend to leave the labor force. But this is where we in our ministry, we have been giving our suggestions, our comments, and also our opinions, and even put forward what our agenda is to encourage women to come back to work. So 60%, of course, it is not the duty of the Kementerian Pembangunan Wanita, Keluarga dan Masyarakat. It's not our ministry alone. But having said that, we still have to do our part by making sure that what and how can we achieve that, you know, for us, also for the country, because we have to think for the women. So that's why we have we put up our policies on making sure there are daycare centers for their children. And apart from that, we realize that it's not just about daycare centers for the kids. You see, as women or even as children of the elderly parents, they will not be at ease when they go to work, when they know that they have their elderly parents at home who need care as well. So therefore, we are focusing into that as well. These are issues that need to be tackled fast. So that's the reason why the government feels that it is their responsibility to ensure that we do new things in order to meet the requirements for the future.
YB, if I may ask over there, so clearly it's very important to establish the care economy. So we are able to ensure that qualified women are not having to drop out of the labor force immediately after starting up their families. And let's talk a little bit more about why is it so important for increasing female LFBR when it comes to not only the national community, economic development, but it's also regarding the 2030 SDGs, right? And the 2030 SDGs, of course, we are only going to be about 6 years more away from it come next year.
Well, if you refer to the gender gap index, it reveals that in 2021, women surpassed men in education. We have been talking about this for a long time, actually, in school, in university, but only when it comes to higher level after the masters is the PhD level. That's where the women tend to drop a bit compared to men, because I think because of the concentration of women wanting to have their own family, and then they want to take this their opportunity to have their own career. So given women's higher educational attainment, their lower labor force participation compared to men indicates that there is a significant underutilization of our human resources in Malaysia. This is why, amid the global economic challenges, including the recent financial crisis, especially those affected by COVID. So there's a new way of planning for the women. Actually, in the country now, our people and also the country as a whole, they have high expectation on us as policy makers. Therefore, it is our duty to ensure that we have to think of what are we going to do, because the country is going to face aging population.
Because of that, I'm very grateful that you also happen to mention the fact that care work for the elderly in our families, for the invalid in our family, also tends to form due to our usual stereotypes on the women in the family.
Oh, yeah. But we are also quite fortunate. We have our LPPKN as an agency that takes care of the fertility growth, because now it is it's low.
So it's about balancing everything all at once.
Because by 2030, we will be an aging nation. Now, what are we going to do about that? How do you fill in the gap in between all this? So we have the LPPKN to ensure that they have facility, and also to have programs to make sure that at least we can add on to the population. Apart from that, we have to think of the economy as well. Now, economically, what we're going to do? Actually, many people have been thinking that this care industry, we are not going to use care economy, because otherwise people will be confused between us and economy ministry. We have our plans now for our care industry. We want to make sure that we have as many as possible people, especially women. These are mainly girls and women who are in this industry, because but
to ensure that they have access to fair wages and of course career progression.
These are the people who are taking care of, we are thinking of, and we want to make sure that they are not just carers, they are skilled carers.
Correct,
so
recognized
at the
and
same
paid.
time, that's why we have to give them a certificate in order for them to really be marketable out there, and they will be given a higher pay. So this is economically what we want to do for the women as well, and for us to address in the future. Of course, there are other things that are also suitable for the women, but I think in this industry, since we are the policy makers, therefore we feel that it should be our duty to ensure that there is something for the girls and the women for them to focus on in order to tap on this industry. And it's going to be it's a lucrative industry though.
Absolutely, it is globally valued at billions.
Thank
you very much, Yang
Thank you.
Berhormat. Right, well, we'll be featuring more highlights from Yang Berhormat Minister Nancy Shukri's interview later on in the show. First, though, on to the discussion. Tengku Aira, if we could begin by anchoring everything that we're discussing about women's economic empowerment by looking a little in depth at the need to establish the care economy in Malaysia. Why is this essential?
Thank you for raising this issue, much needed issue to be discussed, and it has been a focus in Malaysia recently, rightfully so. So first, I think we need to recognize and understand care work. And so there are two types of care work. One that is direct, personal and relational care activities, such as feeding a baby, nursing an ill or disabled partner or family member. And then we also have indirect care activities, such as housework, basically cooking or cleaning. And within the care work, we have paid care work, where you work as a nurse, teacher, or doctor, or domestic worker. And we also have unpaid care work, basically those that we do at home, and it's important to also recognize that they are considered as work as well. And in the majority trend globally, the care work are delivered by women, and they are mostly by unpaid carers. Then which brings us to the next point, is basically economic empowerment issue of women, basically mainly delivered by women. It's important to also ensure that they stay in employment, and the quality of their employment also needs to be ensured. Since there's a lot of burden on women, sometimes it can also impact their mental health, and these also basically incur healthcare costs. For Malaysia, I think if I could highlight, what we need is universal care services, quality care services, care policies, care infrastructures. And seeing the burden that it has on women, it is important to ensure that we redistribute this burden. And we can distribute this burden between men and women by looking at more family concepts, basically ensuring family-friendly working arrangements, such as flexible working arrangements for both male and female, parental leave for both male and female. And if I could also highlight the importance of basically leaving no one behind, we can also ensure that all of these interventions also applicable and tailored for the lower income. So basically, it is important to ensure that all of these interventions are care-friendly and also gender responsive.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Tun Khaira, because that actually helps to answer the long-standing conundrum Malaysia has experienced, which is that as with development over our life cycle as a country, we have seen increasing education access for women, university graduation, etc. However, that major dip occurs in women leaving the labor force, and there actually is a 27% gap almost between men and women of working age. That is one way to increase the labor force participation rate, or LFPR, from 55% or so to about 60%. Min Hui, moving along now, let's cast the net a little bit wider. How can we encourage the government to actually adopt gender responsive budgeting, or GRB?
Right, thank you for your question. I think when we look at gender responsive budgeting or any kind of gender responsive policy making, there are a lot of barriers in place, and a lot of it boils down to a misconception about gender responsive policy making. The idea is that gender responsive budgeting is supposed to respond to the needs and realities of men, women, boys and girls, and all the people who live at different intersections of these identities. But the issue with that is that people tend to think that gender responsive budgeting or gender responsive policy making accrues benefits only to women at the expense of men and other groups. But that's simply not true. I think what we need to do in Malaysia is really to articulate the case for gender responsive budgeting, how it really is a strategy that benefits everyone. And we also need to look at how we can train the government into mainstreaming this across all ministries, and to look at the wider public education on gender responsive budgeting.
Absolutely. And I think the fact is that we are much more open to actual open data in governance systems. It's important to also make it now gender disaggregated, so we can be collecting that and making evidence-based policies. Moving deeper into a point that you did raise a bit earlier, and Min Hui, I'll ask you about this as well in a bit. Let's talk about how disproportionate imbalance between paternal as well as maternal leave is now currently affecting women's LFPR.
Yeah, coming back to the point on the importance of parental leave. So now we have much higher maternity leave, 98 days for women, and we have 7 days paternity leave for men. So it means we are still under the assumption that majority of the burden should be placed on women. So if we are looking at, as we should, look at shared responsibility, parental leave is the solution. Then you would have leave adequately allocated for both male and female. And in doing this, it is also important that we ensure compulsory allocation or quota of the leave for male and female in order to achieve the goal of a more equitable solution. We wouldn't want parental leave to basically result in a majority of the leave being given to women. If there is a compulsory allocation, then fathers and mothers will both have to take up the leave. And this has shown to be evident for example, in European countries, to be beneficial. Father and children have better relationships. So as a family, the child well-being has improved. And it has also benefited women in terms of reducing the gender pay gap. By evidence, this has worked so far in the European countries.
All essential ramifications, particularly concerning what it takes when women are elderly. We also have about 30% less savings than men, coming, of course, from the gender pay gap. Min Hui, anything to add to this perspective?
Yes, I think when we're talking about shared parental leave, we do need to be cognizant about the barriers to successful implementation, and a lot of it boils down to cost. Now, in Malaysia, if we look at things like maternity leave and paternity leave, a lot of it is full employer liability. That means employers pay for the full cost of it. But that is not necessarily sustainable over the long run. Earlier this year, there was a survey run, and employers had actually reported preferring to hire men over women because of this extension of the maternity leave. They found that the costs were too much. At the same time, we know that a lot of employers in Malaysia, 70% are SMEs. So we really need to think of more sustainable modes of financing parental leaves. We do not want things like unintended consequences like hiring discrimination to crop up. So really what Malaysia needs to consider is tripartite funding, which shares the cost of these parental leaves across the government, across employers, and across employees themselves through social or employment insurance. I think this will go a long way towards ensuring the uptake of these parental leaves, and it will be really important to ensure the co-parenting happens in the home and also go against the norm that women are inherently the caregivers. But one more thing is that we do need to be very cognizant of how we structure parental leave. It does need to be shared between women and men. We need to have a set allocation for men as well, because what happens is that women take the bulk of all of those leaves, and that affects their labor market attachment. It affects their income and career progression over time. So we need to be very nuanced and very aware when we design such family-friendly policies.
Sure, and also looking across sectors and what each sector might need. I'd also, of course, like to mention at this point that these more sensitized policies, 98 days for mothers, a start of 7 days for fathers, currently only still apply in Semenanjung or Peninsular Malaysia. Right, thank you very much, Tunku Ira and Min Hui. Well, there you have it. We take a quick break before we begin our second segment on legislating gender equality. Stay tuned, don't go anywhere.
In 1969, the United Nations declared that parents have the exclusive right to determine freely and responsibly the number and spacing of their children. That same year, the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, was established. Our mission? To ensure rights and choices for all, especially women and young people. In each and every one of the 159 countries that UNFPA is established, we work hand in hand with their people, government and social organizations towards ensuring every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled. In Malaysia, our exceptional journey began in 1973. Exceptional simply due to the will and desire of Malaysians to constantly uplift opportunities, health, access, and most of all, choices for every generation. With aspirations for the country and people of the nation outlined in each Malaysia plan, UNFPA has worked diligently towards its realization by providing training, research and recommendations, consultations, solution-centric platforms, advocacy, and investment. And Malaysia's results to date are inspiring. In the 1990s, Malaysia committed to both the International Conference on Population Development's Plan of Action, as well as the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, cementing Malaysia's commitments towards upholding and enhancing reproductive health rights, gender equality, and women's empowerment. In 2003, our joint efforts resulted in Malaysia becoming the first Asia-Pacific nation to cost-share the UNFPA country program. Today, we continue our unwavering commitment towards attaining the 12th Malaysia Plan and the 2030 SDGs. No matter what new challenges may arise, we shall remain resilient and committed to the people and government of Malaysia, to ensure that no Malaysian is left behind, no matter their gender, age, creed, or disability, towards continuously building a better and brighter tomorrow for everyone. UNFPA and Malaysia, celebrating 50 years of progress.
Welcome back to MWGF, The Review. Now onto our second segment, Legislating Gender Equality, where we look at new legislation introduced since the pandemic, such as the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act, the Anti-Stalking Law, as well as highlighting how better gender equality can be achieved. Firstly, I'd like to welcome my panelists, Lillian Kok, Senior Program Manager with AWAM, All Women's Action Society Malaysia.
Thank you.
Suryani Kemper, President with Family Frontiers Malaysia.
Thanks for having me.
And Daniela Zulkifli, President with the Association of Women Lawyers, AWL.
Hi.
So before we begin our discussion, ladies, once again, I had the opportunity to speak with the Deputy Minister in the Prime Minister's Department for Law and Institutional Reforms, YB Ramkarpal Singh, on key legislative matters impacting our women and girls. Let's check out his comment. YB Ramkarpal, thank you so much for making time to join us.
Thank you.
YB, if we could get started by discussing when it comes to legislating gender equality, your department, under of course the Prime Minister's Department regarding law and institutional reforms, the anti-stalking law has actually been one of the landmarks. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and the work that has been done behind the scenes to ensure that, well, it's finally operational as of 2023?
There's been a call for anti-stalking laws to be put in place for a long time. And so, with those considerations in mind, we passed the anti-stalking law the middle of this year. And various provisions in that legislation allow for a victim to seek relief from court without the need to have legal representation even. What that means is the victim does not have, can make an application to court without the presence of the opposing party. And he can do it himself, or she can do it herself. And or a legal guardian can do it on his or her behalf, or of course a lawyer can do so. It makes it a lot easier compared to the normal court process, where an application of this nature is made. It's always inter partes, where the other party is present as well, which might intimidate the victim to a certain extent. These were various mechanisms that were introduced in the anti-stalking law.
Definitely, and that is actually extremely survivor-centric. Moving along from there, Yang Berhormat, I'd also like to ask about your thoughts regarding one of the 11 proposed amendments to the Suhakam Act, which is to mandate 30% representation of women for Suhakam itself. Let's then perhaps cast that same lens when it comes to women's political representation. Would it be possible to also do something similar? Why or why not? And what might you recommend to make sure that all our political parties as well eventually are moving towards parity, that 50% of women, as we are in society, but also in political office and political representation?
Well, I think certainly greater representation of women should be encouraged in politics, but there are various challenges which would arise in the political arena compared to Suhakam, where you can legislate its composition.
Right.
So you can have laws passed to state 30% of women and so on. But when we talk about politics, it's a bit different, because it's the outcome of the composition of the Dewan Rakyat, for example, really depends on the outcome of the elections. We have Article 46 of the Federal Constitution, which sets out the composition of Parliament. But it does not state how many percent should be women and so on. So if at all, that particular provision, Article 46, would have to be examined to see whether or not it can be amended to accommodate a percentage of women. But I think the better option would be to encourage political parties to come up with policies of having a minimum number of female candidates. If they win, obviously, would increase the number of female participants in politics. So I think that might be a better option, which of course would need to be studied further.
Yeah, Berhormat, moving into one last area of discussion, which is of course the Sexual Offences Act against Children. Now, SOAC of course has been around since 2017. However, amendments were made in March 2023 to further enhance child protection, specifically for girls, of course, who are far more impacted by such offences. Would you have any perspectives on how exactly this is operationalized?
The Sexual Offences Act was amended in March this year, where various provisions were introduced to further strengthen or protect victims. And of course, many of these victims are young girls. And the new provisions introduced were the outlawing of greater penalties for live streaming of sexual activity, and also for those who engage in extortion of that material against victims. There were also amendments pertaining to the trial process, where the procedure for victims giving evidence have been somewhat made a bit more relaxed compared to the usual adversarial system of doing things. So, for example, there are provisions which allow for pre-recorded evidence of victims so that they are not required to attend court, which can be quite an intimidating experience, especially for young children. So these were among various amendments that were made in March, of course with the main objective of protecting young children.
Definitely, and I must say that that specifically the last segment that you mentioned for pre-recorded statements, that is deeply trauma-informed, and definitely kudos, and hopefully there will be many more such cases prosecuted and swiftly. Yang Berhormat, thank you so very much for your time. We really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Right, so having watched the Deputy Minister's comments, Daniela, if I could get the ball rolling by asking you from AWL's perspective, what have been the impacts insofar observed of the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act? That was, of course, very much long awaited.
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this discussion. So the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act was passed in Parliament sometime last year, but only 5 or so provisions were or have come into force as of this year. And those include basically the definitions, the establishment of the administrator in relation to anti-sexual harassment, as well as the power of the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development to make regulations for the Act. So as far as impact is concerned, we have yet to see it because the tribunal hasn't actually been set up. We understand that the tribunal will be set up sometime end of this year. So you can't make a complaint, you can't really see where that goes yet. But having said that, as far as we are concerned, the groups, the anti-sexual harassment advocacy groups, we have been actively lobbying for the improvisation of the Act in terms of, firstly, the organizational responsibility, and that is to ensure that organizations, whether public or private, have a positive duty to make sure that the environment is safe for everyone and to actually be able to address any issues if, like, let's say, somebody were to make a complaint. And secondly, and this is, a very key provision that I think we need, is protection against victimization. Because a lot of times, when someone lodges a complaint, they fear retaliation. And that does happen, especially when you're complaining against somebody who is in power. And so it's very important that there is a protection against that retaliation so that you feel safer to actually speak up.
Sure. So actually looking at the workplace culture as well is just as important as legislating. Lillian, I'd love to move a little bit deeper into something that, of course, YB Ramkarpal had mentioned. The anti-stalking law is also operational. It's also very interesting that it applies to survivors, especially women and girls who are survivors of not just physical, but also online stalking. Tell us more.
Stalking itself on its own is defined as a repetitive behavior of following somebody, tracking somebody, and even like continuously communicating with somebody to the point that the person would, the recipient will feel threatened, unsafe, and can't really, they will disrupt their day-to-day life. Prior to this, right, so it's quite interesting, and we the women's group, we welcome this anti-stalking amendment to be included in the penal code. However, it took us so long to come up with that, and mainly because of the behaviors that I've mentioned just now. Our culture equates that with the culture of, we romanticize behaviors like this. So that's why I guess that we normalize it. We normalize it when somebody repeatedly follow us, repeatedly show up to our space, repeatedly violate our spaces online as well. So we have received a lot of online violence, right? Whether it's harassment or stalking, because the cases that we receive in AWAM, there is a fine line between online harassing and then online stalking because the behavior is repetitive. So we get mainly these behaviors are motivated by obsession, jealousy, or revenge. And ultimately, it is the power in how the perpetrator feels that enables them to go through with how they're feeling, this obsession, this revenge, this jealousy, and then the power for them to do so. That's why they proceed and do that. So I think for the longest time, women in Malaysia have been victims of stalking, ex-wives, current girlfriends. Even we have a case in AWANI where the neighbor was being stalked by the neighbor themselves. In a recent report in the Star, I saw that 36% of Malaysians has experienced stalking, and they feel fear because of that stalking. And it is also reported that if stalking is not being addressed on a legislative matter, the issue will perpetuate itself to a more serious crime, such as other more serious sexual crimes, or the worst, probably murder.
That's right. So we've definitely seen some of those also highlighted in the news cycle. Thanks for expanding on that, Lillian. Suri, so still on the issue of power dynamics, but now moving into the current citizenship legislation in Malaysia. What does the current status of the citizenship law actually communicate to Malaysian women by and large, from Family Frontier's perspective?
So for Family Frontiers, at least, I think what we all want to acknowledge is that, we grow up in Malaysia. Malaysia typically is a relatively egalitarian society, and as daughters of Malaysia, we grow up believing in our own equality, in the fact that we are equal to our brothers, to the men in our family, equal in value, our opinions are heard. But then as we grow up, we tend to receive signs that we are not, in fact, equal. Right? And one of those signs, I think, is one of those big signs is in the law, in the fact that our children born to Malaysian women are not of equal status than children born to Malaysian men. Because a Malaysian man can, in fact, marry a citizen of any other country and have his child born in any country in the world. And that child will be entitled to Malaysian citizenship. Whereas Malaysian women, on the other hand, depending on who they marry, if they marry a non-Malaysian, if their child is born abroad, that child will not be entitled to Malaysian citizenship, and in fact has to apply for Malaysian citizenship. And that process is frequently fraught with bureaucracy, and documents a success rate of only 1%. So that should tell us how hard that process is. And so we are, in fact, not equal. At the end of the day, a classification, it's a clear telltale sign that we are second-class citizens in Malaysia.
And of course, Malaysia is one of less than 30 countries worldwide that still practices this discriminatory citizenship law. Family Frontiers, of course, has been working very hard, has kept the issue very visible, and we're hoping for a resolution. But with that also come some other things along the way. Tell us more.
One of the things that I wanted to highlight was the fact that the Malaysian government has, in fact, post the advocacy that we've been doing, Malaysian government has in fact said, yes, we want to change the law. We want to amend these citizenship provisions to give women the equal right. However, and of course, this is very exciting. We welcome this. However, one of the things that we have to consider is that in doing so, they've also introduced a bundle of amendments. So that is comprised of some good amendments, which includes this equal citizenship for mothers, for Malaysian mothers, but also includes some very regressive, aka bad amendments, right? Which threaten to take away existing provisions, existing rights to citizenship for groups of vulnerable children in Malaysia, including foundlings, for example, citizenship rights to PR holders in Malaysia. So then this becomes a very bitter and poisonous pill to swallow for Malaysian mothers, that our advocacy is now being taken to restrict the citizenship rights of other vulnerable groups of children. And as we said earlier, right, that means that while mothers of Malaysian mothers whose children are born abroad get a win in terms of the equality of their rights, not all mothers then win, not all Malaysian mothers win, because other children, other groups of vulnerable children will lose existing protections that are embedded within the federal constitution with regards to their citizenship rights, and they will lose that. This is not how it has to be. At the end of the day, what the government could potentially do is decouple the amendments. They could move forward with the progressive and good amendments and hold back on the regressive amendments to study the impact further, right? To understand that the result of these regressive amendments will in fact worsen statelessness. and put in place a plan to think about to deal with the impact of these amendments, right?
Mhm.
So our call is clear. Push forward on the progressive and good amendments and pull back on the regressive or bad amendments.
Thank you very much. Suri, Lillian, as well as Daniela, been an absolute pleasure to go through, of course, the good as well as some of the more challenging legal aspects remaining for Malaysian women and girls. Well, with that, it rounds up our discussion on legislating gender equality. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a short break.
The people of Gaza require sustained access to food, water, fuel, and health care, including sexual and reproductive health services. Hospitals need to keep running and remain safe. Hospitals and health facilities are a lifeline for people who are most vulnerable, including pregnant women. We must safeguard all health facilities and civilian infrastructure and protect lives. UNFPA joins calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire so that aid can reach civilians in desperate need. We are working tirelessly to respond to the needs of women and girls. But what they need most is peace.
Welcome back to MWGF The Review, brought to you by the United Nations and UNFPA Malaysia and supported by Astro AWANI. Now, moving into our third and final segment, which focuses on, very aptly, gender norms awareness and comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE for short. I'd first like to welcome my panelists for this segment, Tunku Ira Tunku Razif, Assistant Representative, UNFPA Malaysia, Robert He, who is co-founder and vice president with Society for Equality, Respect and Trust, All Sabah, Serata, and Alia Mariam, program manager, Sport Community Program. Thank you all for being with us. And before we begin, though, let's watch the rest of the interview with YB Dato Sri Nancy Shukri, Minister of Women, Family and Community Development. From there, Yang Berhormat, let's move on into discussing education, gender norms, and awareness. Your ministry also, of course, has been going through some very intensive efforts to help reduce sexual harassment and also doing quite a few anti-sexual harassment awareness and campaigns. All of this also comes together with the fact that we finally have legislation that addresses this. Tell us a little bit more, YB.
Sexual Harassment Act that has already been approved. Of course, at the moment, is still at the advocacy stage because only those provisions which are related to advocacy had been approved for us to move about. And we have targeted the whole country, each state at least one program, which we have just completed last month. And now we are still doing it, an ongoing process. It is no longer as a state targeted event, but we have to do pocket events. At the same time, we are going to have our tribunal to complement this in order for them to implement, to execute. Actually, at the moment, we do have act that is implementable by the police. You know, the Sexual Offences Act. They also have the Criminal Procedure Code.
Correct.
But now, under us,
Tribunal
that is civil actually, where they can claim remedy for that. So we are providing another alternative for those victims who have been abused by the other party. Now, at the moment, we are still doing advocacy, and also we are also, providing for the services by tribunal and then engaging the presidents, all the tribunal members, for them to be able to assist us to proceed with the hearing and all those. So that is still ongoing now until we hope by the end of the year everything is okay. It is not just our ministry alone. We have to work with MOF, we have to work with AG chambers, and also the human resource. But so far, I think everything is moving quite smoothly, with the hope that before the end of the year, we are able to recruit some of the personnel. So it is very important. This particular advocacy is to tell the people out there, not just women, okay?
Yes,
It's,
men
it
as well,
also
of course.
includes men. This is to tell them that they can act on whoever the perpetrator is, so they can act on it. So this is what we are telling them when we go on the ground. So this is very important. Yeah.
And YB, if I could end with your perspectives on one final area. So how can we also improve overall SRHR, or access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, not just for women, but also for men, so that overall we have a society that's not only safer and healthier, but even considering children, for example, who need to have access to comprehensive sexuality education, CSE, so that they are more aware of their bodies, their rights, and etc.
We also go to schools for children, okay, to tell them about the safety and also what is safe and what is unsafe touch.
Correct.
And of course, we educate them and also telling them, okay, what is the number? How do you deal with this matter? So we make sure that they remember numbers to contact, and also the way to go about, and all the other community members, especially the community heads, to also assist the people in their village. So everybody is expected to play the part. So this is not just about your own family at home. Our family now is wider, it's all out there. So for us, it is our responsibility to ensure that they ought to know how to go about with it. So that's why we publicize the numbers, how to contact, who would be the first person you should be speaking to in case it happens to you. So these are stories that we tell through the advocacy, and we are working closely with the police, with the other agencies as well, and of course from our own agencies, to ensure that this is what we should be doing for the country. And we hope that we have a safer Malaysia, safer society out there, and people will be aware that they should not be doing this to other people. So they should respect the rights of other people.
Sure. Thank you very much, Yang
Thank you very
Berhormat,
much
for sharing your insights. Right, so having listened to everything that YB Nancy Shukri said, let's get started. Alia, if I could begin by asking you, what exactly does SPOT do?
Thank you so much for having me. So SPOT is a volunteer-led movement. We deliver comprehensive sexuality education in schools to children 7 to 16 years old. We've delivered our programs to over 29,000 children since 2015, and our audacious goal is to reach 100,000 by 2030.
Oh, that is absolutely amazing. But given the vast scope of children, families, etc., that you all have been exposed to, tell me a little bit about what attitudes are like towards CSE when it comes to schools, when it comes to parents. What has SPOT noticed over the past 8 years?
When we speak about going into schools, we always get the question of, are you sure you're going into schools? We always have that kind of feedback. But when we go into schools, the teachers are more than welcoming. The parents are also very invested to know what are we going to teach their children. So we actually come in with a pitch, and they are, okay, you can proceed. And then once we have delivered our programs, they actually call us back. So I can say most of the feedbacks that we receive are almost 100% positive.
That's amazing. Now, another interesting thing that SPOT has been doing, Alia, is teaching not only exclusively girls, but also integrating boys. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so basically we started off as a menstruation-centric program. That is why we started off with teaching girls first. But in 2020, we found out that we should integrate boys into our programs as well. Like our founders always say, it's addressing the whole problem, not only half of the problem anymore. So we started with putting boys and girls into one classroom, and we found out that it actually instills more respect towards each other, because now the boys know what's happening to the girls.
From that very foundational building steps stage, right? Thank you. Robert, building upon exactly what Alia was telling us about, and of course from Sarata's perspective, tell us about what the role of the Malaysian education system ideally is in helping us as eventual adults going into the workforce, getting married, and being a wider part of society.
Thank you for having me. At Sarata, we essentially believe that, a large part of how people get into adulthood is through their family upbringing, and a large, obviously, given that school represents 13 plus years of that cycle, it plays an essential role in bringing together how kids learn about the world around them, becoming adults themselves. The problem is whether or not that syllabus is complemented by a family unit, and whether or not that combination brings together a healthy individual going forward. Because as we've seen, say in our generation when we were growing up, where we only had one class of in science about the sexual reproductive system, and that was what was considered, like sexual education. But for us, it doesn't always result in, say, a healthy family environment when these kids start growing up and start interacting with adult peers, when they get into their first relationships and they have to start dealing with, say, the first reproductive cycle of females, right? Or alternatively, when they have to tell the men how to behave around them with their needs. Creating that healthy family sort of boundary has always been a goal of Stratas, including communicating healthy family development. We find that having a comprehensive syllabus in addressing our understanding of the world brings together a better person that will then go on to raise the next generation of kids, where they end up becoming more wholesome, more understanding, and especially of the other sex.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. So it's very clear, looking at Robert's work as well as Alia's at Spot, that early intervention is the key. Tengku Ira, moving into asking you about the other essential aspect of gender norms awareness and access, what about ensuring that underserved populations are not left behind when it comes to reducing stigmas?
Thank you, Tamina. So I think first and foremost, we need a supportive legal framework. And Malaysia has done fairly well here. And what do we need more beyond a supportive legal framework? We need other frameworks, monitoring and evaluation programs that basically operationalize this set of laws and policies. I still will come back to Robert's point about the importance of education. It's the second point. So gender equality education, in UN we have the United Nations International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education. Basically, this guideline promotes comprehensive sexuality education, and it has a heavy component on prevention of stigma and discrimination. Two sets of stigma, basically stigma in terms of understanding reproductive health itself, to normalize the conversation around reproductive health, and stigma against other people that have other differences. It basically talks about how to treat each other equally, tolerance, inclusion, respect, and it looks at basically respecting people of differences of ethnicity, race, age, gender, and so forth, including people who are from the lower income, people with other health conditions, like people living with HIV/AIDS. So it is very useful to have this sort of education, and if we have a generation that has been educated comprehensively in sexuality education, then they would then, of course, educate their children accordingly.
Exactly. It's all about the next generation that comes, right? Tengku Ira, if you could also share a little bit about UNFPA's recent study that focused specifically on unintended pregnancies.
Adolescent pregnancy, that study, we did it, we just launched it this year. So in that study, the study really highlights the importance of comprehensive sexuality education. How it highlights that it actually takes the voices of the young girls. The girls themselves were telling how they really appreciate such an education. And they also highlighted that they want to be guided. They want to be guided in terms of how they can have more say in relationship, for example. So,
Absolutely. So taken holistically, all the work that Spot does, Serata, together with the United Nations mandates and UNFPA Malaysia's work, we can look forward to a much more actuated generation within just the next couple of years. Well, that's all we have for now, dear viewers, for our third segment. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a blueprint for a better future, a guiding light. It represents a powerful unifying force for equality, social progress, justice, and respect. But the journey towards human rights is not a path that was completed in 1948 or when Nelson Mandela walked free. It is an ongoing quest that requires each of us to be torchbearers of change. It is a call to action that transcends borders, cultures, and beliefs. As we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, let us remember that it is not just a historical document, but a living testament to our shared humanity, a timeless guide. In its spirit, let us forge a path of hope, unity, and justice, lighting the way for generations to come.
It's been an insightful hour. We've taken a deep dive into fundamental aspects for ensuring Malaysia's women and girls' well-being. And what's clear is that equity stems from removing barriers. This means access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR, safe and respectful workplaces with zero gender discrimination, making the care economy tangible and accessible, equitable parental leave, and awareness programs to remove gendered care work norms, ensuring women have equal citizenship rights. And all this brings to life Malaysia's commitment to each one of our citizens, especially women and girls, bringing us that much closer to achieving gender equality and the 2030 SDGs within this decade. This has been MWGF, The Review, and on behalf of the United Nations and UNFPA Malaysia, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Tamina Kausji, signing off.